You're listening to Mimir, the podcast for aspiring entrepreneurs, with me, your host, Maddie Kelly. Each week, I dive deep in my interviews with successful founders to leave you with the tools necessary to build your dream lives. So get ready for some kick-ass advice. Hey guys, welcome back to Mimir. In today's episode, we're talking about all things supply chain. And if you don't know anything about the supply chain, you are not alone. I truly didn't know anything about the supply chain until the pandemic happened. It changed everything for everyone, but truly no industry was as dramatically impacted as the supply chain. The pandemic brought the issues that were plaguing the supply chain for so long to the forefront, helping people understand not just what the industry is, but also how stagnant it had become. Whereas now we're in a very exciting time where innovation is booming in this space and investors are jumping at the opportunity to get in on the ground floor. The supply chain has never been sexier, and it's a fantastic time to be a founder in this industry. And wherever there's innovation and budding startups, you know you're going to find me there. So as part of that effort, I'm heading to Manifest Conference in February, which is the innovation hub for all things logistics and supply chain. Thus, I have the honor of interviewing Katie Date, their SVP of Industry Relations and Strategic Initiatives. She has an impressive resume, starting at MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics, where she spent a decade researching. She then went on to found the Women in Supply Chain Initiative. So I was truly thrilled to pick her brain on all these changes happening in the industry. This episode is perfect for anyone who's considered starting a company in this supply chain. It's a great download on what's happening in the industry right now and how to succeed in it. Katie is also sharing some practical tips for those in D2C. Since logistics makes up such a huge portion of these kinds of businesses, she's providing actionable tips to help you reduce costs and improve efficiency. However, I was especially excited to discuss how and why Katie founded the Women in Supply Chain Initiative. Her advice on climbing the ladder and finding success in male-dominated industries is fascinating. She walks you through how she founded the initiative also, so if you've been thinking about doing something similar for your industry, you're not going to want to miss this episode. Katie is an academic, but she's also a doer. She's incredibly inspirational and wonderful to chat with. I truly hope you guys enjoy this episode as much as I did, so please help me in welcoming Katie to the podcast. Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Maddie. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. This is a really fun interview for me for multiple reasons. And I think it's going to be really interesting to the listeners because supply chain and logistics is something I only recently started to learn about, but it is major and it impacts a ton of different industries, not just the supply chain. So I am really excited to hear your expertise and sort of hear from your experiences. But to get started, I think maybe we should sort of talk about COVID, because I think that sort of was a big catalyst in the industry that created a lot of change and brought about a lot of the opportunity that's happening right now. So I would love for you to walk through sort of what happened, tell the people about it, and why it was so impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like before COVID, no one in my family or my friends even knew like what I did or what supply chain was. And then all of a sudden during COVID, people didn't have toilet paper. They didn't have like the things that they really needed. And so all of a sudden they started to think about, where do these things come from? And what goes into making sure that the things that I need and the things that I want are on store shelves. And I think, for the first time, really in most of our lifetimes, COVID exposed a lot of the inefficiencies and the gaps within the supply chain and within suppliers, and really forced leaders of all sorts of companies, from CPGs to pharmaceuticals to, fresh food producers, to really see the dependence that they have on their suppliers and the importance of all sorts of different suppliers.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when COVID happened, like I was definitely one of those people that had never even heard of the supply chain. It was one of those things that was thrown around in like economic discussions where it was like, oh, the supply chain. And you're like, oh, supply chain. But like, it's just a word, But yeah, it wasn't really until then. And also, I think a lot of startups who work in, commerce, deal a lot with logistics, and it's a major portion of their cost structures. And it wasn't until a founder that I follow on YouTube really started to sort of dig into this, because she has their own logistics department within that I think it started to become a little bit more popularized and people started talking about it and really starting to understand it. But with those inefficiencies that were highlighted, obviously came great opportunities for, innovation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So 2 points on that. A lot of my former, students that I work with at MIT go on to found companies, and I feel like they are some of the best founders because they know the supply chain.
Mhm.
But most founders that I talk about don't realize the huge expense that
Yeah.
supply chain is. They're typically very brilliant people, but don't realize a huge portion of your costs are shipping costs and production and, being able to secure all of the different, products that they need. The other, point that I think is important to make about COVID is it opened up the opportunity for so much innovation
Mm,
within the supply chain. All of a sudden, people were at home and they had nothing better to do.
yes.
And they started thinking about what are all the different things that we can do to make the supply chain better? And there was all these investors out there
Mm,
who were really interested because the pain point was there to, really start investing in supply chain. So the amount of money that was invested into supply chain startups and supply chain tech and,
yeah.
2020 and, even now going to events with supply chain startups, it's so exciting because when you see people look at, their companies from all sorts of different perspectives, people that are non-supply chain people, it really brings this breadth of innovation. And that's one of the main things that we focus on at Manifest is creating that innovation.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that a little bit more because I think this is such an important part of entrepreneurialism as general is being able to look at a problem from a very different perspective and create a new solution. And I think a lot of early entrepreneurs are very nervous about jumping into an industry that they might not have a ton of experience in. But at the same time, that provides a really unique perspective. Like if you're a third party, unbiased, you're never had any exposure into something like that, you can really see things from a different lens and you're in a unique position to see how innovation gets addressed and how, not to no pun intended, but how it gets manifested.
Yeah, no, totally. So, Manifest is an ecosystem event. So we have, the startups there, but we have the investors there and we have the big, shippers, the big brands. And it's this unique opportunity for all of them to come together. And one of my favorite parts of Manifest is the innovation stage. So we have, I think, 40 different, founders who are on stage talking about their disruptive technology. Some of them, the first time that they've, gotten the opportunity to pitch to an audience that's, as rich as this, but it really gives them an opportunity to take their idea for, a real hefty spin and get the insight of all of these different professionals within the industry. We also do office hours where startups can sit down with investors and with experts and get real-time feedback
Mm,
from these people in the moment. And so I think that takes a little bit of the fear maybe um, out of, you know, dipping your toes into supply chain.
yeah,
The other thing that I think we do really well is we provide lots of fun activities. And I always personally, I don't love networking,
yeah,
but when networking is an activity and it's kind of fun and you have something to talk about, it makes it so much easier.
yeah.
And so we've really kind of, we're a startup ourselves. We're only in our fourth year and, we've really taken to heart the being in Vegas and having fun and, encouraging people to, go grab a glass of wine from, the Rosé All Day bar or, go get get a beer or, go to the puppy park together, do something that kind of breaks that ice. And I
Yeah.
think that makes supply chain a little bit more approachable and
Yeah.
a
A little
little
more
bit
fun.
less. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
like it's kind of based on like my understanding and my experience, which is very limited. I feel like supply chain is kind of it's like teaching an old dog new tricks a little bit. Like
Yeah.
the audience that are in these shipping companies, especially like like mom and pop carriers or like brokerages, have very much like historical set in their ways type of attitude where it's like this is how we've done things for the last 700 years, and
Right.
so inviting change has been a little bit difficult. And I feel like people previously like didn't think supply chain was hot, and then the other day I heard somebody say a quote that was like supply chain has never been sexier. And like I think to have
It's
it again,
true.
it's going to be really really fun, and it does like take another spin on it. I know I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be such a fun opportunity, especially like the energy I bet is really really fun.
Yeah, no. So the supply chain of 20 years ago, the dirty, like very male dominated, that, I mean, yes, that still exists to some extent, but a lot of supply chain is, super sexy. It's a lot of fun. It's very data and technology driven.
Mm.
And for lack of a better term, it's, not your dad's or your grandpa's supply chain anymore. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
really, supply chain has taken leaps and bounds, and we're benefiting from the strong history and foundation that, those people 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago when supply chain wasn't even the name of it, have done. But, we have all these entrepreneurs that are just shaking things up and making new, innovations and bringing new technology to light every day.
I would love to double click into that a little bit. Like, what ways have you seen that the supply chain has really changed? Like, I want to just give some examples to people who have no idea what the supply chain looks like or what we're talking about, just to sort of contextualize it for them, because it's a big deal.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. So my favorite example is my first job out of college was in a distribution center and was so manual. People building pallets, people unloading things manually from trucks, pushing boxes off of a line, like super, super manual. You go into that same distribution center today and trucks are unloaded by robots,
Oh my
all of
god.
the pallets are built by robots. The sortation system is all digitalized. Um, and the production and the speed at which they're able to get the products from that distribution center to the stores is like 10x. Like, it's
Yeah.
amazing. The, introduction of AI and robotics and now chat GPT, for better or worse. Um, all of that coming in to supply chain, it's making things more efficient, and it's allowing the workers of previous to really save their bodies. The supply chain jobs, whether it was working in a port or working in a warehouse of old, were really, really manual, break your body type jobs. And with all of the robotics that are being used now, these people are able to still do their job, but with the assistance of robots, and do their job longer
Yeah.
and go home and have, a very fulfilled, active life, where before, they felt, really beat down after a day. So to me, that's one of the biggest changes that has occurred. And the fact that distribution centers now are super clean, whereas before they were so dirty.
Yeah, and like I think this applies to any industry that's really being affected by AI and robotics. Like there was a fear element before where people were like, "Oh, how is this going to affect my job? I'm going to be replaced." Like, this is a bad thing because it's, putting people out of jobs, but I think that something I've noticed in the industry is that there's more of like a desire to shift that mindset, as opposed to we're replacing you with robotics, but it's more like you have an opportunity to level up your skill set
Upscale, yeah,
And
totally.
totally. And to like learn a new skill and to go from, I think, like, going from somebody who's just pushing boxes around to instead being like, how can we maximize efficiency of these robots? Like, we notice that they're doing, X times of work a day. We think we can improve it to, 4X times a day or whatever. Like, there's an opportunity for more mental stimulation.
Yeah, absolutely. And back to your original point about, the bottom up change, it's the feedback of a lot of these people who were doing these jobs for
Really,
years that helped to create these, to create these robots and create these solutions because more than, the CEO or the chief supply chain officer at the top,
really.
these people knew what they needed, and the people that embraced it are the ones, like you said, that have now upskilled and are now, the engineers that are, helping to optimize these robots.
It's so funny because I feel like this is something I think about a lot from like the beauty of small businesses is that change is relatively quick. It happens because the founder has a vision and like, there's so much heart and soul that goes into it. And sometimes I think as you scale, there's like an unfortunate inevitability of the founder CEO losing connection to the product. And like,
Yeah.
so when it comes to driving change and innovation, it's typically, the people who are doing the work every single day who need the improvement, and for them to get that, it's like this whole thing of like going up the chain of command and the ladder, and it's this whole like, you know, thing where and I'm like, I don't understand why the CEO sometimes like doesn't see that, but at least it's happening and at least we're seeing it, and it's one of those things like I don't have an answer for that, but it's just something that I think about and I see a lot, and it's like something that's always top of mind for me.
Yeah, and I feel like it's important for, whether it's the CEO, COO, chief supply chain
Yeah,
officer to remember where they came from,
totally.
and remain humble. Some of the best leaders that I've had in my career, or leaders that I've worked with, have always remained humble and open to feedback from across the board,
Yeah,
and that's how they stay in touch with the product, with the business. Is you don't always have to have the answer. It's
totally.
okay to ask your people for what would you do.
Yeah, actually, my dad tells me this really funny story. He works in hospitality, and I can't remember if like he had just started in a new role. I think he had just gotten a new role, and so he was C-suite at that time. So he took all of the other executives in the C-suite and had them perform like the duties of the housekeepers and the janitors and like a couple other like entry-level positions throughout the hotels. And like he said that he did that on purpose because he started, as a pool boy and like ended up, working his way up. But for him, it was very much the same. Like they have no understanding of what it's like to actually do the day to day work. And it's so important to go back to that because that is how you are not only like a good leader because you can relate to your employees, but it's also like, okay, now I know how to drive change better.
Right. And that's why you'll notice UPS during the holidays, everyone from the C level on down hops on a truck and is,
No way.
flinging packages. Yeah, no, it's one of their requirements that for that short period of time that you need to spend a little bit of time on the truck
All
and
hands on
get
deck.
out there. And, it's so important to them and their values, to remain connected to the business. And there's other companies that do that as well. But UPS, it's like to their core to make sure that no one feels like they're, above being on the
Yeah,
truck.
I love that. Something else that you briefly mentioned that I want to touch on because I've been thinking about it. You mentioned that you teach at MIT.
So not teach. So prior to Manifest, so this is
Yeah.
actually one of my favorite stories.
Okay.
So I've been at Manifest since mid 2024,
Okay.
and in January of, excuse me, 2023, and in February of 2023, I was a keynote speaker at Manifest and was talking about the decade that I had spent at MIT at the Center for Transportation and Logistics. And while I was there, I wore a variety of hats working with our corporate accounts and our supply chain exchange. I founded in 2017 the Women in Supply Chain Initiative, which we can definitely talk a little bit more about. And that's what I was actually talking about when I was at Manifest. I also worked with our international network of centers, which had an education component. So I got the opportunity to work with students from around the world. But no, I was not a professor. Don't have my PhD.
So MIT's Department of Logistics and Transportation, what was that for? Like, are they shipping stuff or import? Like, what is that for?
No, so it's an education. So there's an education component, a master's degree. There's a corporate outreach portion of it, which also includes executive education. So I created a lot of executive education programs, and then also a huge research component, which was a lot of the companies that we were working with. We were doing research with them, and actually part of the research that I was alluding to during COVID was a project that I did with one of my colleagues around diverse suppliers and how diverse suppliers were able to be much more responsive during the pandemic than your big suppliers. They were able to be so much more agile.
Okay, wait, this is fascinating. You're like low-key an expert in the supply chain field because you've done extensive research and been part of that process. So,
yeah, I've done a lot of things.
So what are some of the other hot tips that you learned while you were there? Because that's a great tip, right? Is like, so diverse suppliers, what do you mean by that?
So to be considered a diverse supplier, you either need to have a veteran status or women owned or disability owned or some sort of ethnic minority. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can be classified as a diverse supplier. And what we found out was talking to big companies like, UPS, Intel, during the pandemic, they're typically smaller, suppliers were able to pivot so quickly for them. Whereas, their big suppliers in a lot of cases didn't come through for them. And it's so interesting because in a lot of cases, these small diverse suppliers, they go through so much to be able to win these contracts with companies. Some companies beat them up, not saying all of them, but, really make them go through a lot and cut their prices. And what our research was able to find is it's really these small suppliers that were able to really come through for companies during the pandemic. And a lot of them have, been able to grow and scale because of the ability to come through in times of disruption.
That's so fascinating. So like, I'm thinking about this in terms of, potentially the kind of companies that are listening to this, like, I'm thinking like e-commerce, anything that's D2C, they all have to deal with talking to shippers, talking to their manufacturers and getting those logistics and warehousing and like, how do you, make your supply chain as optimized as humanly possible, so you're saving money between, where your distribution centers are and how to strategically cut costs amongst that. So like, working with a diverse supplier, for example, would be a great tip because then that allows them to have a better relationship with them and to be able to rely on them in times of disruption, which happen all the time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think out of everything that you just said, the biggest tip that I would give people is don't always go after the cheapest supplier.
Okay.
Because in a lot of cases, there's a reason that they're able to cut prices so low. I always tell people, like, look for the supplier that's willing to meet you in person. Look for the supplier that's interested in relationship because in times of disruption, relationship is really what is going to pull through and what is going to be the saving grace.
It's almost ironic a little bit how like despite the fact that the supply chain covers such vast like distances, the personal aspects are still very much prevalent. So like people, are picking up the phone, they're talking face to face. It's a lot of like, time spent and truly a lot of like getting to know each other. And whether you're willing to invest in those relationships determines how well like your supply chain operates.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I always tell people supply chain is small in the grand scheme of things. And so, don't burn bridges because, I guarantee you that if you burn a bridge, it's going to come back to you.
Yeah.
And, always make sure that you're taking advantage of the relationships that you can make and take advantage of every opportunity to get to know someone because chances are they're going to come back around or you're going to need them in the future. More so than any other industry I know, supply chain is really tight, and word gets around, particularly in the entrepreneur
Yeah.
world.
And I feel like I mean, I'm making an assumption here, so feel free to correct me. But I assume that's also the reason why, or part of the reason that you founding Women in Supply Chain was such an important process because it's such a small industry. Like you said earlier, it's very male dominated. So the women in that space like really had to come together to support each other and to provide, a system where you could thrive in this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason that I founded the initiative was because I would sit at tables with, some of the most respected companies in the world, and I would a lot of times be the only woman at the table.
Mm.
And so when there was another woman leader at the table, I would often ask them like I'm naturally a curious person, and so I would always want to know like tell me about your story, tell me how, you got to where you are. Because unlike things like, finance or, human resources, people don't, at least a while ago, didn't necessarily go to school for supply chain. So a lot of people that are in leadership positions right now in supply chain didn't go to school for it. So the stories are always super interesting. Um, and a lot of what I heard from these women was, well, I said yes to an international assignment, or, it's been really tough. Everyone has thought that I'm too emotional or I'm too bossy or, I'm too much of the B word, you know what I mean? And I got sick of hearing the same story over and seeing, women at a manager or director level not being able to, break through to that, SVP, VP, C level. And so I thought, let's come together and let's talk about this. And, for almost 6 years, the pandemic in the middle, we came together and, really created a strong community of women leaders at MIT, and I think really, impacted change.
Tell
And
me,
that's what we're trying to do at Manifest as well.
yeah, I mean, how did you start it? So did it start as just like a round table, like a coffee chat, and then it sort of grew from there? Or?
So it started again with me being curious, and then, as you do in academia, I created a survey, because
Oh
that's
my God, I love that.
always where research starts in academia. And so I, did a survey and brought together the data. And then from the data, there were kind of four core themes in that first survey that came out. One of them was the importance of mentorship and sponsorship. The second one was the importance of leading global teams and taking those global assignments. The third was on work-life balance or lack thereof for most of the people. And then the fourth was, that dirty word of networking and trying to create opportunities for women to network with each other that didn't involve, going and writing your name on a name tag and, putting it on your chest and, walking around. And
Yeah.
so we started with those four topics, and we had a women in supply chain symposium that, we brought everyone together. The first year was at Converse, and from there it kind of springboarded with some research papers and more Zoom meetings, and really just coming together and creating a network. And it resulted in women being able to know other women, so that when they had roles within their organization, they knew who to reach out to. Because one of the other topics that came out of our discussion was, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times, this isn't unique to supply chain. Women need to, check 9 of the 10 boxes on a job before they even think about applying, whereas men see like 4 and they just throw themselves in the ring.
Yeah.
And so trying to get past that and really give women the confidence that if something looks interesting, maybe you don't get that job, but at least you get the opportunity to talk to that department. And getting creative and learning about other things. And it resulted in more women getting senior positions. It resulted in some great mentorship and sponsorship opportunities, all because we just talked about it. Like, I think that's why forums like this are so important. That's why events like Manifest are so important, because you can only do so much when you're in your silo, but when you're able to come together with other people and learn across fences, like, who knows where you can go.
Yeah, and especially the girlies. When the girlies get together, like, it's amazing, because something that, like, I find unique to women is, like, we connect emotionally first, where we're like sharing our own experiences, right, which comes from a level of vulnerability, and
Right.
we immediately respect that in another woman, and it's like, I see you. And then the next thing that follows is like oh shit, that was my experience too. And then it's like, oh well, like, what if we did this? And then it's problem solving, and then it's building, and then like you see something and you remember, and then like that's another opportunity. And it's just such a beautiful chain of events that I love to see. And something that I haven't heard before that you mentioned was taking international opportunities. Like, I myself, you and I connected over this, like, we both spent time in China, and I tell anybody and everybody who listens that living abroad is one of the best things that you can do for yourself. Like, I am such a changed person because of it, and it's such a slept on way of growing. And I would love to hear your experience with that, and to tell people like why it's so important, because I talk about it until I'm blue in the face, but it's nice to have somebody else talk about it.
Yeah, no, totally. I will talk about this to anyone that will listen. My international experiences are key to, most success that I've had, because until you can see other cultures and walk in their shoes and see how business is done differently, you're going to make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
I will say the mistakes that I can reflect on, just offending, people from other cultures because I didn't know better. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I could tell you stories. But those experiences have made me more humble, and they've made me more informed, and they make me a global citizen.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think so many people, men and women alike,
Yeah.
are so focused on climbing, the ladder as quickly as you can. But I would argue that taking a lateral assignment in another country could be more beneficial to you climbing that ladder, because now a group of leadership in a whole nother country knows what you can do, and you have that kind of extra card in your pocket, and you have all of that cultural experience that just, it makes you a better person, I think.
100%. I think I try to articulate it, and I think from a career perspective, it demonstrates obviously like a willingness to do whatever to prove your value to the company and to drive impact, where you're like, I literally packed my shit and moved to a different country for this company. Like, I definitely deserve to move up the ladder in the next, when that comes around. And then, like, to your point, you have a whole other group of people who are vouching for you, being like, hell yeah, she showed up in this new country, new challenges inherently with that, and stepped up to the plate and drove impact. And so, yeah, hell yeah. And then on top of that, it's humbling. it's grounding because you just start to realize that there's so much more outside of yourself, and it's incredibly exciting, and it's eye-opening, and I think it does give you a new perspective, and it's it just gives you more context to life in general.
Right, 100%. And I feel like if you're able to be successful in a place that doesn't share the same language, the
Mm.
same culture, in some cases, even the same values, and you're able to go there and be successful and drive change and, be productive, I feel like you can do anything. You know what I mean? And
I
it gives you so many great things to talk about
Yeah.
in interviews and things to relate to. You know what I mean? Most people, like, it's, talking about politics, talking about religion, probably not good ideas, in most settings. But talking about international travel, like, it's pretty safe, and it's a way to connect with people on a different level and to see kind of if they have a level of like-mindedness.
Yeah, I mean, I when I was working in China, like, not only was I the only person who looked like me in the entire office, like there was no other blonde-haired American girls, and a lot of what I was doing was in construction, so it was like a bunch of guys. And, sometimes during meetings halfway through they would just switch to Chinese and I'd have to be like, "Hello, still here.
Still here.
Can we run that
Yeah.
back?" Like, I don't know what we just talked about. So it's like I also think as women it allows you have to step up. Like you legitimately have to say something in a meeting, and I know that's hard for me sometimes to speak up and ask questions and to be like, "Hey," but it's your job, and like legitimately I would not know what's going on, and I'm running a $23 million project, like big money on the line, and like I have to know what's going on. So there's no other choice but to step up to the plate and use your voice as a woman.
Right. Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, it's the first time that they're put in a situation where not everyone is like them. I think I told you this story before, but when I was in China, I would constantly have people that would come up to me and want to touch. You can't see it now, but I have freckles like everywhere. And they would want to touch my skin because like I was a freak to them. Like they didn't know like what these freckles were. And it was, again, so humbling for me to now be in a situation where I'm the minority
Yeah.
and to learn like how do I behave in this environment where I'm the environment, and how do I show up as a leader.
Mm,
And it made me, when I came back, look at people in different situations where maybe they were a little bit different and understand how difficult it was for them and be able to kind of meet them more where they were at. And I think it made me definitely a calmer leader,
mm,
and a much more empathetic leader for, the things that they, maybe go through on a daily basis.
yeah. And to be a more understanding leader, I think is a key trait in becoming one of the best leaders, because you're not just like barking orders, but you're more I mean, I would imagine that you're more able to understand your team and how to utilize their skill sets to the best ability to get the job done.
Yeah, no, 100%. It also
So,
it also helps me to understand um maybe when people aren't speaking up and
oh, okay.
aren't feeling like in their power, to help identify and kind of pull them up with me.
Yeah.
A lot of what I went through was you need to prove yourself and you need to be tough and you need to, suffer. And that's not the way that leaders should behave,
No.
anymore. Um, I'm much older than you. You're looking at me like I'm crazy, but I mean that's definitely, I've been in this industry for almost 25 years, and it was definitely like you have to suffer and prove yourself. And now I feel like there's much more empathy and much more like, okay, I'm rising to the next level. Okay, who am I going to bring with me
Mm,
as I come up?
that's so interesting. Like, I'm sure that this is not just in the supply chain, but I find that to be like a global change. I think just who we are as people. We are like, we're out here breaking trauma, and we're doing the most to try to improve ourselves emotionally, to be kinder. And the leaders that are rising now are much more self-aware than previously.
Oh, yeah.
And as a result, it's the leadership styles are changing. And like, what I think was for my parents' generation, which was very much like work hard, be the first one in and the last one to leave. And especially like I learned, in China, it's still this way where it's a very much like about you show face. And people, I'm not kidding, would show up, hours before me and stay hours later. And I can promise you that they were not working, but they were just sitting there because like that was what was considered to be a hard worker versus somebody like who's, incredibly efficient and gets the shit done within those 8 hours and like is working more technically. But, a lot of that I think is changing, to your point. And I think it has to do with how we empathize with each other and how we think about what we want leadership to look like moving forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, going back to the beginning with COVID, I think that, changed the culture of a lot of offices.
Mm-hmm.
I can think back to 10 years ago where, I had a director of HR who would walk around our floor at 8 a.m. on the dot and, mark down on a little list who wasn't there at 8 a.m. and
Oh my God.
walk around again at 5 o'clock and mark down who had left. And I was terrified to be like even a minute late. And now it's kind of like, oh, do you, the train was late or, you need to go to a doctor's appointment, get your job done, that's the important part. And I think COVID broke down a lot of those like old school barriers that were holding on tight and
100%.
a lot of companies.
I love a full circle moment. I love when it comes back all the way to the beginning. And like, again, this is not unique to the supply chain, that COVID blew up our previous ways of working and living,
Right.
and is now showing us ways that we can innovate and that we can improve. And I cannot wait for Manifest. I think it's going to be so interesting to see exactly how people have thought about bringing innovation and new ideas to the supply chain, which is, up to now been a relatively stagnant industry. So I truly can't wait. And thank you so much, Katie, for being here and telling me about it. And I can't wait to see you then.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. We're going to have a great time in Vegas, and just the growth of Manifest over the past 4 years is a testament to how hungry this industry is for innovation. We started out with, 1,000 less than that people, just 4 years ago. And now in 2025, we expect like 6,000 people. So it's going to be a party in Vegas, and are you aware of our after party? That's like the highlight of Manifest for everyone. This year we have a private concert with Flo Rida. So, yeah.
I will be there. It's going to
be awesome.
In my apple bottom jeans.
There you go.
Thank you all so much for listening. All the links to connect with Katie are in the show notes. If you guys are enjoying the episode, you know what to do. Hit that 5-star rating. And if you're feeling up to it, leave a kind review. If you guys have questions you want answered, comment them in the reviews and I'd be happy to answer them at the end of each episode. Don't forget to get your tickets to Manifest. You'll find a discounted registration link in the show notes below. This is an awesome opportunity and personally my first conference, so I'm really, really excited about this. And if you're going, please hit me up and let me know so we can connect in Vegas. If you guys want more from me and Mimir, follow me on social media at Hi Maddie Kelly. Check out the YouTube channel if you want to watch the podcast, and then head to my website, mimir.ink, for my contact info, partnership opportunities, and key takeaways on all of the episodes. I will see you guys next week.